So it's cloud providers that need to push for multi-cloud because they know they will never be cloud number one for the customer. So they need to push for multi-cloud. And I think Google is an example. Or Oracle even more. Oracle Cloud will not be the primary cloud for a lot of companies, but it has a good chance of being the secondary cloud for databases. That's why they are pushing for multi-cloud, because their only option is multi-cloud. There will never be the primary cloud. And the other thing is companies providing software that shines on diverse infrastructure, like you mentioned VMware. If I'm running on one cloud alone, I don't need VMware. If I want to cross multi-clouds, I need some combining technology, which could be VMware. That's why they want us to use multi-cloud.
The Research Labs podcast by Sunday Pajamas.
Appreciate that you're spending the time to talk to us. I would say it was very intriguing to me the way you described how you are working with not just AWS CDK but your approach towards working with your clients. It I would say it was slightly shocking to me because when I asked you, how do you go about, let's say, dealing with your clients, right? You very nicely explained that your idea is to not work with them, and I can only imagine how the clients must be reacting to such an approach. But so apart from that, I believe there are a lot of things we are going to discuss, starting from multi-cloud to AWS CDK and frameworks that are very, I would say, available on the internet, but not a lot of developers or companies are quite aware. With that, I would say welcome to the Research Labs podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Could you, let's say, take us on a very quick journey as to how you got started? How was, for example, your college life, right? And were you always interested in technology even before college? Like how were the early days?
Yeah, so computers and programming was always something I was very interested in. I think mainly because my father was working for IBM. So I had contact with computers very early on. So starting with 6 or 8 years, we had a computer at home, and my father was writing software, and I was like looking into it and playing around. I know my first programming experience was using Cube Basic, this game called Gorilla, but two gorillas are throwing exploding bananas at each other. And for me, it was not just playing the game, but modifying it, changing things, changing the rendering, changing how the bananas fly. So this was like, oh yeah, I can change something in text, and the game behaves differently. And this is what was like, that's great. That's what I want to do. And then over time, I got more into this. And I think that was the starting point to do programming in IT. And then I was going into, doing this.
When you mentioned that your dad was in IBM, were there like was this like a dinner talk discussion every day? Like you'll be talking to him as to what he's working on. Was it like a culture in the family?
Talking about it all the time, I'm not really sure. But yeah, at dinner, he was talking about work. So it was always a present topic.
When you were just figuring this out for the first time, do you think it was curiosity and fascination as to how things are built from ground up?
Yeah, it was about, okay, I know this computers are a cool thing, but I want to know how they work and how you can make them do things or not just use them. I think that was the basic thing. Also, building computers up, like having this hardware, buying a case, putting hardware in it, and rebuilding it, and things like that.
And then you went on to do college.
Yes, I'm located in Germany, so we have a little bit different scholar system. So I was going through, yeah, our highest level of basic education, called Gymnasium or Abitur, and then I was going to university after this and doing my degree in computer science, in information technology. And yeah, that's what was the logical consequence of this IT journey I started early on. And during my university time, I already was working at companies to, yeah, develop software or do things with them. And that's where I got in contact with all these cloud and IT things in the real world.
Do you feel that the cloud is particularly a very young idea, in the sense, it's just maybe 15 years old? Like, yes, there were like ideas that something like this would be possible eventually, but it's so new and not a lot of people still understand how, like, the behind the scene works.
It was really a big change because before I jumped into the cloud, it was like, yeah, we're building servers, building racks, and having hardware and thinking about running a big piece of software on some kind of, yeah, hardware thing in a drawer, basically. And then there was this cloud, and it was like, what's this about? This is, I cannot see it, I cannot touch it. It's just there. It's so in the company where I worked, we had like 60 servers, and I knew all of the names and IP addresses by heart. So I knew exactly which machine was what. My colleagues called me the human DNS. And then going to the cloud, it was like, what? These machines rebuild all the time. They have new IP addresses. You don't care about IP addresses and names anymore. It was like, why? But it totally makes sense. But it was a big change to see, like, okay, you don't name your servers anymore.
Yeah, it's kind of taken care for you, so you can focus on better things. So were you always working with, for example, AWS, or in the early days you were doing something else?
No, so I started with AWS, I think 2013. The company I was working with at this time as a full time employee, it was a private bank in Germany, and we had to move to the cloud for, yes. So the data center before was a room in the office, and was not a great option. So the thing was, do we lease some data center, or how do we proceed with some kind of regulated data center and not having it in the office? And then cloud was an option, and that's how we moved to AWS as the biggest provider for these cloud services, and I've stayed on AWS since then.
When the migration was happening, right, when, let's say, a very traditional bank, for example, is trying to move to the cloud, is there like a lot of, I would say, organizational resistance towards such a big move? Because I don't think it's like, there is this new thing, let's just jump on it. Like, are there like times when the leaders of IT are not quite sure and they need to be kind of convinced that, okay, this is a better way of doing things?
I think, yeah, there are two things on this. So my first experience was with a bank, but it was a very, very small bank. So IT was basically 15 people, and we just decided that we need to do cloud. So yes, we had some drawback, like, yeah, no, we are not allowed to do this. We cannot do this for regulatory reasons, for privacy reasons. And then it was like, what do you mean by we are not allowed? Please show me the line in the law that says it. Yeah, this could be interpreted. No, 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 not interpreted. Where does it say that we cannot do it? It's just we needed to redefine things that have been done this way. Now I'm working with a bank that's way bigger as a client, and IT is not, so IT sees that we need to do this. Um, it's mostly a regulatory thing. So IT is or cloud is not a technical problem for most of the companies. It's a regulatory thing.
In a big organization, there are business people and legal people, and then, or there is also an IT team. And in a lot of, I would say, conventional businesses, the IT leaders are not necessarily given the parts to make a lot of these decisions. So do you see like a shift where the legal teams are, getting more information that, okay, this is the current scenario, this is where the industry is going, and we need to adapt.
Yes, so the legal team see the need for this. Um, Funny thing is, if they have some kind of regulatory audits in the recent time, the move to the cloud is more probable because now they see, oh yeah, the option is not staying on-prem or going to the cloud, but the option is going to the cloud or rebuilding on-prem because we don't meet regulatory standards anymore with our on-prem data center. And then it's a whole different decision. It's not keeping it as it is or changing to the cloud. It's we need to change. Where do we change to? And then it's like, do we really want to rebuild the data center? No, maybe we'll look into cloud. So changing things that come up with some kind of audits might speed things up because yeah, it's so crazy what we have on-prem. Let's go to the cloud. It's safer.
Yeah, I can imagine I would say the confusion in the early days as to we cannot see it. How do you trust it? You know, have you also seen like such stupid question? Not stupid exactly, but if it's new, then people are not really sure.
Yeah, that's the thing. I think one of the problems, that's why I try to avoid this wording in customer discussions, is the naming of it public cloud. For people unaware of the details of cloud, this always sounds like it's in the internet. My whole infrastructure is now living in the internet and it's accessible from everywhere. That's not something I want to have. I don't want to have it public. So I'm trying not to use public or private cloud anymore. It's more data center or hyperscaler. It's not public. Your AWS infrastructure is not public. There are private IP addresses. There is a defined way to access it or not access it. So it's really a private data center, but it's virtualized. It's not public like everybody can access it in the internet.
Yeah, like there are gateways that make sure that not anyone can just ping your
Yeah.
IP, and yeah, that makes sense.
It's the same with the data center. It's connected to the internet, but you have firewalls. And it's the same in the cloud.
Do you still get such questions from the customers?
That's always a thing because it's living somewhere at a data center that's owned by somebody else. How can we make sure that they don't just let anyone in?
So let's take this particular scenario. If you had to explain a client who does not understand that it's not public, now how do you really explain them, for example, something like multi-cloud?
I think multi-cloud has different shapes, and I think some of them are good and some of them I really don't like. So the approach I don't like is, say I want to do multi-cloud for ease of transferring workloads from cloud A to cloud B a day later, which means you will only ever use things that all the clouds support, which will be VMs. You will running everything on VMs and not using any services managed by the cloud provider because you want to move all the time. And you will never do this, but you always prepare for doing this. The approach of multi-cloud that makes sense in my eyes is, this is a service provider A is really good at. This is a service provider B is really good at. Let's use them both for their respective services. So I'm doing AWS most of the time, but I will never ever dream of running a user directory in AWS. This is something Azure AD is really good at because that's what they are doing. So it's always multi-cloud, running your Azure AD or your domain controller stuff on Azure. They just know how to do this.
Let's say a company builds out a multi-cloud infra, right? I was recently not reading, listening to a couple of engineers from VMware, and the question they were asking is that multi-cloud seems to be the hype, but you should really go and talk to the people who are taking care of the operations side of multi-cloud and maintaining the multi-cloud, because it's not a really fun thing to do, because things keep on breaking all the time, because it's like the early days of the multi-cloud. Do you have a similar perspective on it, or do you think this is the problem right now?
Operating multi-cloud is one of the big challenges because always, yeah, you have so many moving parts because you're involved in many different technologies, and if something breaks, everything goes down. So if, yeah, I'm connecting to this, I'm connecting to this, so both need to be up, the connection between them needs to be up, and so on. But the bigger challenge for me is all the compliance and governance, because it's hard to do this for one cloud, and now you need to do this for multiple clouds.
Hmm.
You need to make sure that all the changes they are doing are still compliant with all your regulatory things, and you need to do this for every provider.
Hmm.
So whenever you pick another multi-cloud scenario, you have all the things starting again. All the legal things start again.
Okay. And how much work that is for a single cloud?
That depends, or that highly depends on your industry. If you're a highly regulated environment, this is a several month long process. As a startup, it's entering your credit card ID. But you still, so you always can sign up for a cloud and use it. But then there's like, oh yeah, for AWS, you need to set up organizations and control tower. You need to have your security services configured. You need to have encryption configured. All these things you need to configure. That takes time and money. And now let's start GCP. Yeah, you need to do this again on GCP. You need to set up all their security service, the encryption, the identity management, access management, all these things, these basic infrastructure things need to be done again. Basic network connectivity, having a fiber line to the data center. All these things need to be done again.
I understand compliance, but I don't think I really understand. So I understand compliance from the perspective of engineers, but I don't understand compliance from the perspective of the authorities who are checking the systems to make sure they are actually compliant. So how do the authorities, make sure that things are compliant? Like, do we have to give access to them so that they go into your infra and check things out? Like, how does that work out?
Sometimes they check things, but the first check is always on paper. So you need to write documentation for all the things you do, which takes time. And for multi-cloud, you need to provide the same paper again and again and again. So you document everything you're doing. This is our security. This is our networking infrastructure. This is our legal things. That is all the risk mitigation strategies. These are called cloud inherent risks. This is a catalog of like 40 questions you need to answer. How do we handle this case? How do we handle this case? How do we handle this case? You can do some copy paste, but it's you need to provide documentation to the authorities how you mitigate risks that come from running IT in the cloud.
Yeah.
And this is something you need to write. And they look at this. And if this sounds reasonable, first things is fine. But if this sounds, nah, no, that's not going to happen, then they will look deeper into things, and then they will want to see reports. So you are writing software that's creating reports that makes sure that all your volumes are encrypted, that all your load balance reports use TLS, and so on and so forth. And you're writing tools to create these reports because you need to create them on the fly. And then with another cloud, you need to write these tools again because the APIs are different. That's where multi-cloud really is a big issue, because all these additional tools you're writing, you need to write them for every cloud.
Do you feel that, I don't know, like when people talk about multi-cloud, they never, or I would say they conveniently kind of never discuss these issues? Or
Yes.
yes, is that what it is?
That's something a lot of people are not aware of. Then they decide for multi-cloud, do things. Then the authorities come in and say, we want to see these reports. And then they are, oh, we need to do this, and we need to do this for all our providers. But then it's too late because they're already deep into the technology. So I'm not sure who really is pushing for multi-cloud. So there are, on one side, it is vendors, sure. There are vendors out there that, so it's cloud providers that need to push for multi-cloud because they know they will never be cloud number one for the customer. So they need to push for multi-cloud. And I think Google is an example. Or Oracle even more. Oracle Cloud will not be the primary cloud for a lot of companies, but it has a good chance of being the secondary cloud for databases. That's why they are pushing for multi-cloud, because their only option is multi-cloud. There will not never be the primary cloud. And the other thing is companies providing software that shines on diverse infrastructure, like you mentioned VMware. If I'm running on one cloud alone, I don't need VMware. If I want to cross multi-clouds, I need some combining technology, which could be VMware. That's why they want us to use multi-cloud.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So yeah, that makes sense because yeah, this was people from VMware who are trying to talk about the problems with multi-cloud.
Yeah, because if there's no multi-cloud, they don't have a business.
They don't. Yeah. So let's say if you are an engineer, right? How do you understand what is good for a particular use case? In the sense you use, let's say you are just starting out and you consume information from, like, you trust VMware with what they are saying, and you trust Oracle with what they are saying. But from what you are describing right now, there is definitely a business agenda behind what they are saying, right? So how do you make sure that you are not just following a fad and increasing more work for yourself as you go forward?
So with every marketing that's out there, no matter if it's technology or anything else, all political information is also marketing. All the marketing that's out there, the first question is uh, cui bono. So who profits from it? So who profits from this decision? And then make sure, is the messaging coming from a person that's profiting of this decision? And then maybe it's just marketing. If it's somebody not profiting from it or not being involved at all with this, then have a deeper look at it. But as I said, if VMware is telling me you need to virtualize your machines, agnostic to the vendor, I say, yeah, sure, I need to, because otherwise I don't need you.
Yeah, yeah, that makes.
So I think that's the thing. Always look behind the messaging. What's in it for the person telling you this opinion?
So I was recently talking to a YC company, uh, Arda Finance. I was talking to the CTO of the company, and we were discussing cloud, the cloud technologies they are using. And he mentioned that since day one, they have been very particular about making sure that all the tech they use is very cloud agnostic. And do you feel that this is something that a lot of companies will be doing if they have to do everything from scratch today?
I think it depends on, as I said, it's a VC company. So they are buying shares of a company with the goal to selling it later. They have no idea, or they have no idea who they will sell it to. And the company buying this startup, for example, will already have an IT infrastructure. So the new startup needs to be integrated in the existing IT infrastructure. If they build cloud agnostic, they can now later adapt to whatever cloud the buyer has. If they're now going into one cloud, the buyer will be multi-cloud, not by choice, but by force, because they have, for example, they are running on AWS, they're buying a company that's running on Azure. Now they have two clouds. If you're building your startup multi-cloud, whoever buys it later can integrate it in their cloud infrastructure.
That
So
makes a
it's a
lot of
thing.
sense.
Who profits from it?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Your pool of buyers is bigger if you're cloud agnostic, because people will not be turned off by, yeah, but it's a wrong cloud. But it's not a technical decision. It's a finance decision to be able to sell it.
Hmm. So if we, let's say, put the finance aside, what do you what do you think are the technical benefits of such a decision? Or is it like a personal choice from what you have experienced in the industry before?
Yeah. So I would never advise anybody to be cloud agnostic. Primary, I don't care which cloud you use. If you want my help, it should be AWS, but I don't need to be the one that's helping you in particular. But pick one cloud, because only then you can realize the benefits of cloud. If you're thinking about what's cloud agnostic is something like Kubernetes or VMs, which is both a ton of technology and legacy stuff. If you're building something new, it's serverless. If you build serverless, there is no agnostic way of building serverless. You're using managed services and going deep into the clouds. And then it's coming back to finance, it's way more profitable to run your infrastructure because it costs so less money than running VMs. But you're tied into one infrastructure.
Let's say we are starting a greenfield project today for a healthcare application, which is going to help, let's say, doctors manage their patients. So, very heavily regulated. And it's a startup company who is just starting out. And they're starting out today. So, they have built no software at all. Do you think they should choose to go completely serverless since like day
Yes.
one? Okay. Why would you say
So
so?
the thing is, if you're starting out, do serverless. If you hit any roadblocks using serverless, go containers. And containers with the cloud native solution your selected provider offers. So if you're running on Google, use Kubernetes. If you're using AWS, use Elastic Container Service, and so on. So don't build your own container service. You're not paid for building a container service. You're built for creating a medical app. And only if you hit some things that cannot be done in a container or serverless, which should not happen for something you build on your own, then think about running virtual machines.
So when you advise this to companies, is this advice controversial at this point, or this is what is already happening? Like everyone is doing it.
No, not everybody is doing it. So it's definitely something, but I think for startups, it's more likely to go this route because they look at fancy technology and they want to be bleeding edge and whatever. For existing companies, it's like, but we have so cool Puppet setups or Chef setups, and we know how to use Ansible. And so, yeah, but that's not a needed technology anymore. So it's like, we need to change everything. And humans don't want to change.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So are you prescribing that serverless can practically do everything you could do before with, let's say, the legacy systems?
I think everything is always a big word. There will be things that might be cheaper or better or whatever in containers, in VMs, but it should not be your starting point. That's why I said it's not all serverless, but it's always serverless first. Try to do it serverless. And if it doesn't work, and doesn't work doesn't mean like, oh, I tried it for 5 minutes, I didn't find out how to do it. But really, I hit roadblocks. There was no option. I asked people knowing what they do, and they still couldn't figure out a way to do it serverless. Then think about another technology. Maybe you hit one of the edge cases that are better off with another technology.
Hmm. So you know what I like the most about what you are saying is that it's very cutthroat, and it's very, I would say, very opinionated, and I really like it. Like I would say there are a lot of engineers who kind of just deliver what is asked of them, if you know what I mean. So it's very nice to see that you have a very, I would say, well informed idea as to, okay, this is the way to go. That's very nice to see.
I think there's two ways. As I said, I'm a consultant, so and there's two ways to approach this. Either is I I tell the customer whatever the customer wants to hear. That's one option. My approach is a bit different. I say the customer is asking me for my opinion. That's why they are paying me money. So they will get an opinion. If they don't like the opinion, they are free to choose another consultant. But they are paying me for my opinion. So they will get my opinion.
And do you think you were always like this, or this is something like, you work for a couple of years and then you kind of boil down, okay, these are the things I learned, and these are few of the best things that everyone should be doing, so that's what I'm gonna tell my clients going forward.
So I think there's two ways. So I definitely learned this. So in the start is always do whatever the client wants. The customer is king. I want to have this contract. Going forward, this is two things. One is definitely privilege of the IT industry, and that there's so many things out there that you can have the liberty to choose, which is not true for every industry and not for every person, that you can just choose what you do. So that's the first thing. You can only do this if you have the liberty to say no to a customer. So that's definitely something that needs to be in mind. If you need to do things, you need to do things. That's a different constraint. But if you're free to not do things, and that's the second part, I have too much to do and too less time to do stupid things. So I don't want to waste my time doing things for a customer that I hate doing.
So when you are sharing this, right, this is, I would say, a preference, and this is also, how should I put this, like, only if you have done that, been there, done that, and failed a lot many times, you kind of understand, okay, this is the kind of person I am, and these are the kind of things I really want to do with my career and my work. In the sense, there is a philosophical curve to what you are describing. So how do you think you ended up here? Because I'm sure, like, in, like, even right now you can totally take whatever projects you are getting, let's say, have three or more people who will do all those projects, but I believe you choose not to. So there is a decision there. So where do you think it comes from?
So when starting consulting, I was picking everything that was available. So somebody wanted something that has to do with IT, and I was picking it. So I was setting up Kubernetes clusters. I was writing React application without an idea what React is. I was writing other front end applications. I was doing a lot of things, and in some cases, I really had fun doing it, and I was proud of the result. And in some cases, I was like, please never run this in production. And that's where I meant, okay, it's not my approach to write something that I hope the client will never use because it's so crap. And that's why I said, okay, things I cannot do or that I don't think are good, which makes me not perform well, I don't want to do them.
But do you also feel there is a, I would say, a financial outcome, like a consequence because of that decision, or no?
I think in a first step there is a financial consequence, because if you turn down clients, yeah, you have less projects, you earn less for a time. That's one of the things. Or the risk. It does not need to be that way, but there's a risk of, if you turn down clients, you will have less money. But then later, the thing is, if you focus on one thing and you do this really well, and you build a brand by, oh, this is a guy that's really telling me what I should do and not what I want to hear, this also opens up markets. And then your prices can go up because you're the one delivering exactly this and not doing IT, but doing exactly this. So in the long run, I think it's a more profitable way, but it has risks on the way. And that's why I was talking about privilege. If you don't have the privilege or the runway to say, if I don't get a client for 3 months because they hate what I'm telling them, that's fine. If it's not fine because you need to eat and you don't have the runway to do this, do the other way. That's totally fine. It's not bad to do it the other way, but if you can do it, it could be beneficial to do it this way.
I would say I am able to slightly relate to this because I would say up until last year, October, November, we were on the first phase, in the sense, take whatever we are getting, don't cry about it. Let's just go, 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 right? And now that we have some runway built, I think we are in that transition phase. And I would say the one thing that I'm feeling in the last couple of months is a tiny bit of uncertainty, that which kind of leads to slight level of anxiety. So how do you think you dealt with that?
I think I get what you mean. Until some weeks ago, it was like, yeah, because there's always this year end coming. All your contracts are running to the end of the year. So it's always this time around September where I don't have any contracts for 2023. Currently, my income will be 0, which is really frightening. And then you scroll through Twitter, which is a mess right now in itself. And the things that are there is like Twitter's laying off people. Google is hiring freeze. Amazon hiring freeze. Stripe laying off people. And so on and so. Okay, there seems to be a big thing in big tech. How will this affect my customer base? So there is definitely this anxiety of, are we getting another .com bubble thing, or do we have some other financial crisis 2008 thing coming up? Should I do whatever comes along the way or not? As I said, this was some weeks ago. Now, two big customers signed for next year. So I say, okay, there are two different levels of income. I say, okay, it's enough to be happy with it. It's not like this year or like what could be, but it's enough to be safe. I can eat, I can sleep, I can have a house. That's done. So basic things are satisfied. Everything else is, how many tools can I buy for fun?
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's the thing.
Yeah, I was talking to a couple of, I would say, uh, finance people, like VCs from Canada. And, these are the guys who were also there in the 2008 crash. Like, they saw the whole thing go down in front of them. And so I kind of asked them, what are your thoughts on what's happening right now? And their predictions are that this is going to be longer, like the crisis is going to be longer. And for some reason they chose the word worse, which I don't think I quite understand, because I don't really understand what happened in 2008 as well. I can understand what happened technically, but I was too young to understand the consequence of that. So yeah, that was the perspective. It's going to be worse this time. So
But I think it depends on the industry and the things. I think what will stop happening is all these Amazon, Google, Netflix type salaries where you eat avocado for 500,000 a year. That's not going to happen anymore. So these engineers, yeah, showing they have a good life, know they work hard, they're really brilliant people, but it always looks like they're eating avocado toast for 500,000 a year. That's not going to happen in the long run. But on the other hand, I see all these not top tech companies building up on IT and cloud. So I don't see any slowdown in the small or especially medium-sized enterprises. There's no slowdown at all. They're just going bigger, 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 and they are rising their salaries from a whole different level. But it's like, instead of 100K, they're now paying 150 to get people. It's not three companies that pay crazy amounts, but the total amount in the industry is still rising to get people. But maybe you need to look into normal clients or normal employers and not these big five, whatever.
But it's like, the big five kind of consume the brains, or I would say the newspaper headlines. So that's all we kind of end up seeing on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah. Yeah. So we see, as I said, Stripe, Netflix, Amazon stopping hiring or letting people go. That's what we see. Or Twitter firing everybody and then rehiring. Um, that's what we see in the media. But we don't see about 5,000 companies having open positions for people who know how to work the cloud.
That makes sense. So when you say people who know how to work the cloud, right? I would say that's a good segue to discussing how to think about building cloud projects. And I think in the email you mentioned that it does not start with writing code. So could you share as to like how to start thinking about that? Yeah.
As always, you should start with architecture. And with cloud, and especially serverless, architecture of your application means also infrastructure. And that's the thing. It's not like I'm writing code, it works on my machine, and then I talk to ops people how to run it for real. But it's always part of the infrastructure. So if you're running serverless, you're having different Lambda functions, you're having step functions, you're having gateways interacting, you have managed services. So before you write the first line of code, you need to decide which services am I using, how am I interconnecting things, what do I want to do. So your your application is not only code in the traditional sense that you're writing in Java, TypeScript, whatever. It's also infrastructure code and talking to APIs of managed services. So you need to do a lot of research. What's the right tool to solve what I'm doing? Instead of just, yeah, let's write it down. Let's write a Spring Boot application, put everything in it, start it up, try it. Okay, I'm done on my machine. I just need to run it in production now. That's not how it works in the cloud.
So if you're, let's say, building a serverless application using Lambda, then maybe figure out how to use Lambda first before writing any piece of code.
Yeah, and really figuring it out. Not like, oh yeah, I can run code there. Oh, that's fine. Fine. I can call other Lambda function. That's fine. I have 15 minutes. That's fine. Yes, you can do this, but it's broken by design if you do this. So it's not only how can I use it, but how should I use it?
So are you saying in a way that you also need to understand things from a solution architect's perspective before building any application?
Yes, so you need to have an architecture before you write the application. Because the problem is it will not fail in the case or in the sense of not working. It will work no matter how bad you write it. It will work, but it will explode at any given point in the future, and you have no idea when.
How many companies do you think right now understand this from what you are seeing in the industry?
I think there's a mix. There are companies seeing this, but their conclusion is, oh, this is complicated, we're not doing serverless. And the others is they don't see this and they build some crap thing. They look on Stack Overflow for the solution where they find another crap thing that somebody else tried, and they're building systems that work. And I think that's the biggest problem. It's not that they get immediate feedback that it's a bad idea, because it works as long there's not much going on. From the financial side and from the technical side, this is working for all your tests you're running on your personal account or with tens or hundreds of customers. This is working. It's not expensive, it's fine. And then you scale up, and either it explodes on a technical level or it's so expensive. And then it's, oh yeah, serverless is bad. No, you just used it wrong.
A lot of conversations which I am having, for example, with CTOs and engineers, I don't think, yeah, I don't think a lot of people are you know doing what you are mentioning from my personal understanding of things. In the sense, I don't think a lot of companies are focusing to think about infrastructure as a integrated part of the application already, or maybe I don't have enough data on it.
No, you're totally right. There is always this. This is software and this is infrastructure, and this is configuration. Sometimes even they have a configuration management, and configuration is something else. And I'm trying to no, it's all the same. A release is a release, and we don't care if this release changes software, business logic, or infrastructure, or configuration, or anything. Everything's a change. Everything's the same. Everything lives in the same repository. Everything's part of your application. There is no difference in the process if you change business logic, infrastructure, or some configuration. It's always your application changing and being released. And that's for most of companies, this is shocking. Like, so, but I want to develop on my own and then throw it to the ops teams. And the ops teams, don't want to talk to developers. I just want to run software. I don't care what it does. That's the craziest thing I see a lot of times. Like, yeah, we're running this application. I have no idea what it's doing. We're just running it. Like, how can you operate an application where you have no idea what it's doing?
From this perspective, right, even for example, a cloud engineer needs to understand what the application is doing inside out. So you're saying the cloud engineers and the developers need to start talking even before writing any piece of code, like since day zero, and work together to build the whole application out.
Yeah, everybody in the chain needs to have some idea what's happening, or need to know the person that's knowing it. So it's not like I don't care. You don't need to know everything, but you need to care about it and know who to ask if you need something. So not everybody needs to know how to write firewall configurations, but you need to be aware that this is a thing, that it exists, and there is somebody on your team who knows how to do it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So don't you think you're increasing work for a lot of people?
It's increasing work at some point,
Uh-huh.
but it will
But like the
decrease
payoff is
the
worth it.
work.
Yeah,
Yeah, so the payoff is you will not invest this time or money during failure scenarios later.
makes complete sense to me. Yeah, yeah.
It's like testing. Testing takes time and money, but you still do it because not testing is even more expensive.
So okay, I would say I am also a bit not shocked exactly, but like this is making so much sense to me. But I don't think I have seen this in my experience, like an integration at these deep levels. So if a team wants to do this from day one, how should they go about it then?
So definitely make sure that you're using the cloud in a correct way. And that's like talking to people. That could be consultants. Yes, that's the sales part of of my opinion. Talk to consultants. It doesn't need to be me. Talk to consultants. Talk to community. Go to community events. Talk to people already doing this, and do this before you finish writing, because it's so hard from a financial and technical point, but also from a psychological point, to change what you already built. Because if you build it and somebody tells you it's wrong, you don't want to change it because you've written it this way. So it cannot be crap, because you would then, yeah, give in and say, yeah, it was crap. If you do this upfront, it's like, oh yeah, we can still change it. So it's way better to change something on paper than in your IDE.
That makes sense. But I would say I'm coming from a place where how do you even know that it's wrong? Does it make sense?
How do you know it's wrong? Talk to people.
Okay.
Talk with experts and say, this is what I'm going to do. Is there any red flags? Is there something that... And normally in the first approaches, there's always like, please never do this. And if you get this information early on, you just don't do it. if it's ingrained in your application and it's a fundamental thing, like, oh yeah, we can change it, it takes a year.
Well, I think it makes I think I'm gonna think more on this and try to see how to go about this. Apart from that, I also want to ask you, like, what are few of the things that are new for you right now that you are exploring, apart from all the things you're working on. Like, are there some new tech which is not really popular yet, but you are really excited about it?
So I think serverless still has some very new things, and there are new things coming out. So moving, so let's say a year ago, serverless was using Lambda functions. And now serverless is trying to avoid Lambda functions by direct service integrations, by step functions, by things like that, by having services talk to each other without glue code in the middle. So that's a thing. How can I directly integrate services? That's also going in some parts of the application going into these low code solutions. I don't want to call them no code, but it's still code. It's just a graphic way to write code. So you still need to have algorithmic understanding what you're doing. But for some things, low code could be an option. AI ML is an upcoming, really interesting thing that not a lot of people are using. Not always having some if cases on a CSV file is AI. So AI is more than that. So this is really something that I think is an upcoming technology. So that's the things that I'm looking into for the future. How and when to use AI ML, how to use low code solutions, directly integrating APIs and services into each other. Do you really need to write code for everything, or is there something out there? That's the things.
So when you, for example, figure out that, oh, this is something new, how, like, what I would say, what is like the workflow for that new tech to come to your notice, and you for you to start like, prescribing to your clients. Like, how does that shift work? Like, if you found something new, you maybe work on it, you build a project of your own. Like, how does that work out before you start prescribing to your customers?
So up until now, maybe this will change in the future. And normally, I hear about it on Twitter, and more people are talking about it. And then it's like, oh, not only one person mentioned, but multiple. Maybe this is something I should look into. Then reading some blog posts, looking, watching some YouTube videos, and see, oh yeah, that's something that's interesting, that could be beneficial, and that's not too far away from my current set of knowledge. If it's something completely new, I think the way to decide if it's something is too expensive. So it should be something I'm partly familiar with, but it's a new angle on something I already know. And then I try it out. I see if I have an idea for a small project or one of my small hobby projects where I can just try it out. And if it works, yeah, I basically put it in my tool belt. And if I then find a customer that has a problem that could be solved by using this technology, we'll try it out. But it's not like trying it out because it's a new tool, but it's in your tool belt, and then you can see whenever the need arises, you use this tool. And you try, maybe that's a solution for this problem. Maybe you can go on a different or on a new way to do this. But it should be a project that has where the risk is manageable if it doesn't work. So not something by the end of next week we need the following thing, not using a new tool.
And how do you, like, come up with hobby projects?
I never thought about how I come up with it because I have more ideas than time. So
In the sense, yeah, like, how do you decide, okay, this is something I should, build?
and normally it's something I need.
What kind of ideas? Yeah, exactly.
So one of the ideas was I'm president of a sports club in my city, so I needed a tool to manage who's working on events. So who's yeah, so we are running events, we are having sports events, we are having a restaurant, So who's working there, who's doing which shift, and so on. So I needed a tool for this, because before I was doing this, it was an Excel sheet and everybody was writing in it, and it was like a mess. And I said, I needed a tool for this. I'm an engineer. I want to try out technology. Okay, let's build a tool that people can use to do the shift management for my sports club. And with this tool, I have a real life application where I can integrate step functions for processes. I can do it fully serverless. I can um, have a single table design Dynamo that's more than like a to-do list. It really has more entities. And so it's a real world project. But if there's something wrong and it doesn't work, it's about 100 people I know that have a problem with it. They will send me in WhatsApp, and this is not working. So I know I will look at it next week. It's not the end of the world, but it's real users on it, and I think that's important for a hobby project. It needs to have real users, because it doesn't have real users on it. It's not research. Yeah, you will never know if it works.
And how does the building of such an application start? Do you start with the infra or the UI or talking to the people who are going to use it? Like,
Writing down all the features I want to have, writing down the features I don't want to have. So really deciding what to put into it. If it's too big, you will never be finished. So really define an MVP, then defining the data model, and seeing what kind of database I will be using, because that also decides a lot of things in the technology afterwards. It's always data gravity. So the database is one of your most important decisions, because that's the one you will not change easily. There's no problem changing from a container workload to a serverless workload or the other way around. You just re-implement the logic. Migrating data is not fun. So you will very likely not change your database. So this is what I'm starting with. And then I'm looking into, oh, this is what I want to do. And then, because it's a hobby project for this reason, what's the technology I want to try out? I want to do it serverless. And now I wanted to use, I was doing Angular all the time. Now I wanted to try out Next. So this hobby project was using Next. Just because I want to know how it behaves in a real project, not because it's the best tool for this thing, but I wanted to see how it works. And that's then how this goes.
are these projects on your GitHub?
In this case, not. That's exactly a very interesting topic. There's not much projects out there. So a little teaser on this. We're currently working on it. We're in the German speaking, or yeah, in the Germany, Austria, Switzerland community of AWS. We now decided to build an open source application that has a real use case, basically a hobby project that's not only my hobby project, but from the community or parts of the community, that is really showcasing things in the cloud. So how to do infrastructure as code, how to use step functions, how to use serverless in a real world project, and not like the millionth to-do list. So really a project that has more entities, has different use cases, has an app, has a front end, has things.
So it's going to go live by when? In like a couple of months?
Yes, I definitely hope in a couple of months. So we're right now starting with the feature list and the data model. And when we have this, we will bootstrap the first projects, and then we will have it. We will develop it in the open. That's the reason behind it. But we will start at a certain point. We will not start with an empty repository, because nobody could follow like what's going on here. So there should be something you can see. As I said, it needs to have real users. So we are building something that we really can use, and we need to use it for upcoming events. So it needs to be there because we want to use it.
Well, maybe when you actually launch it, we can have like a catch-up session, and we can talk about, yeah, we can talk about more things that are gonna come up.
Yeah, perfect.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I would say this was fun. I learned something. I'm gonna try it in the next 6 7 months, and when we talk again, maybe even I will have a project that I can showcase to you using exactly these concepts.
Sounds perfect. Yeah, it was really fun. Nice. Thanks for having me.